You're blocking my hallway." That was all Dr. Harmon said. Not good morning, not welcome to the team. He looked at Diana Cole the way people look at furniture they didn't order. Inconvenient, misplaced, easily returned. He took the clipboard from her hands without asking, scanned it once, and dropped it on the counter like it had offended him personally. X-ray techs don't touch patient charts. They move equipment and they stay out of the way. Do you understand that? Or do I need to write it on the wall for you? 23 people in that corridor heard every word. Not one of them looked up. Diana said nothing. She picked up the clipboard, she moved to the side, and Dr. Harmon walked away without once registering that the woman he had just dismissed was the most dangerous person in that building. If this story already has you gripped, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from tonight. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Subscribe to our channel and stay with us all the way to the end, because what's coming will change everything you think you know about who's really standing among us. Diana Cole had been at Womack Army Medical Center for 19 days. 19 days of arriving 7 minutes early. 19 days of keeping her eyes on the equipment, her hands on the work, her voice at a volume that required people to lean slightly forward to hear. 19 days of being exactly what her personnel file said she was. A 39-year-old radiology technician with a nursing background, a moderate work history, 2 glowing references from facilities in Tennessee and Ohio, and absolutely nothing about her that would cause a second look. That was the point. She had requested this specific posting, not because Womack was prestigious, it wasn't, particularly. Not because Fort Bragg was desirable, it was loud and overcrowded, and the cafeteria coffee tasted like something that had given up. She had requested it because of its patient population, because of the units that cycled through its trauma bays, and because of a name she had seen on an unclassified transfer manifest 14 months ago that had not left her alone since. She kept that reason in a place inside herself that she did not open during working hours. She moved her equipment cart to the East Corridor and began her morning inventory. Portable units, contrast supplies, the lead aprons that were always in the wrong order because the overnight staff never quite understood the system she had established in the first week. She reordered them without comment. Small habits, old habits. Dr. Harmon passed her at 7:42 without acknowledging her presence, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. She noted the way his coat sat on his shoulders, stiff, deliberate, the posture of a man who had worn authority so long it had calcified into costume. She noted the 2 residents trailing him like apologetic satellites. She noted that he spoke to them in the corridor at a volume designed to carry because the corridor was his domain, and he wanted everyone inside it to understand that. She went back to her aprons and kept moving. The ER at Womack ran differently from civilian hospitals. The pace had a particular texture, controlled and layered, the way rivers run differently above and below the surface. On top, you had the ordinary traffic, dependent family members, training injuries, the respiratory infections that always spike this time of year. Underneath, you had the other traffic. The cases that came in with escorts, the cases where the curtains closed faster and the conversations dropped lower, and somebody always seemed to be standing near the door who didn't have a medical reason to be standing near the door. Diana understood both currents. She moved between them without disturbing either. At 8:11, she was calibrating the portable unit outside Bay 3 when she heard the radio at the charge desk crackle. Trauma incoming, 2 units, ETA, 6 minutes, active duty, multiple, nature of injuries, unconfirmed. The energy in the corridor shifted, not dramatically. These people were professionals, and professionals don't perform urgency, they apply it. But Diana felt the change the way you feel a weather front moving in, a pressure differential, subtle and absolute. She moved her cart against the wall and waited. The first gurney came through the ambulance bay doors at 8:17. Male, early 30s, GSW to the shoulder, alert, communicating clearly, angry in the specific way that soldiers get angry when they've been hurt and can't do anything about it. The trauma team moved to him with the organized efficiency of people who had done this many times before. The second gurney came through 40 seconds later and stopped the room. He was dark-complexioned, compact, with the kind of build that came from years of functional work in difficult terrain. His tactical gear was partially shredded. His right leg was wrapped in a compression bandage that had been applied in the field and was already at capacity. His face was contracted into an expression Diana had seen before. Not pain exactly, not fear exactly. The expression of a man who could not make himself understood, and understood precisely how dangerous that was. His lips were moving. Behind him came 4 operators, Delta by the kit. The one at the front was built like something that had been assembled with specific purpose. 6'2" at minimum, jaw tight, eyes moving through the room in the systematic way of someone who had never once walked into a space without immediately cataloging every exit, every face, every unknown variable. His name, Diana would learn shortly, was Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb. She had already noted the rank. She had already noted the way he moved. She filed both things quietly and went back to watching the man on the gurney. "We need a translator," Webb said. "Not a request, the statement of a man communicating a requirement. He's been talking since the vehicle hit. We don't know if it's medical. We don't know what it is. We need somebody to tell us what he's saying." Dr. Harmon materialized from the direction of his office with the timing of a man who had a radar for moments of institutional authority. He straightened his coat. He took the situation with both hands. "We have a protocol," he said. "Linda, call the language line." Linda was already on the phone. Diana was standing near the equipment alcove outside Bay 4. She had not moved since the gurneys came through. She watched the man on the gurney. His lips were still moving. The words came fast and low and carved themselves into the air of the room without anyone catching them. She recognized the language in the first 8 seconds. She kept her face exactly where she wanted it and said nothing. The language line connected at 8:21. The interpreter spoke for 35 seconds. Then there was a pause. "I'm sorry," the voice said through the speaker. "This is not a dialect I'm able to assist with. The regional variance is significant. I'd recommend a specialist." Dr. Harmon's jaw shifted. "Get me a specialist." They tried a second interpreter at 8:24. This one lasted 20 seconds before reaching the same conclusion. The dialect was specific, not standard, not commercially taught, shaped by geography and elevation and the particular way that language fossilizes in isolated communities. Webb was standing at the foot of the gurney with his arms crossed and his eyes moving through the room with methodical patience. He was not panicking. Men like Webb didn't panic, but he was calculating, and the calculation was not producing a result he found acceptable. "How long does this take?" he said. "We're working through our resources," Dr. Harmon said. "He's been trying to tell us something for 22 minutes, Webb said. The words came out level and clean, which somehow made them heavier than if he'd raised his voice. 22 minutes is a long time when somebody's bleeding. "I understand that, Sergeant. The protocol." "I understand the protocol," Webb said. "I'm asking about the timeline." The man on the gurney reached out and grabbed the arm of the nearest paramedic. His grip was still strong. He said 3 words, repeated them. Urgent, specific, the cadence of someone who had been trying to deliver the same message for a very long time and was running out of time to deliver it. The paramedic looked at his hand, looked at the room, looked helpless in the particular way of someone standing in a gap they cannot cross. Diana heard the 3 words clearly from 15 feet away. She straightened a piece of equipment that did not need straightening. They tried a third interpreter at 8:27, a fourth at 8:30. By 8:38, they had reached 7. A hospital volunteer with conversational Arabic who apologized immediately, a physician from another department who spoke Farsi, and tried genuinely and got close enough to generate confusion rather than clarity. A contractor from the base who offered a guess about medication that he himself acknowledged was uncertain. 7 interpreters, 27 minutes. The compression bandage on the man's leg was at its limit. Dr. Harmon's composure was beginning to show its infrastructure. He kept his voice controlled, but the expensive pen in his hand had stopped moving, and he hadn't noticed. The residents flanking him were exchanging looks that they thought were invisible. Webb had not moved from the foot of the gurney. He was watching the room with the systematic patience of a man who had learned that in the absence of the right answer often came from an unexpected direction. His eyes moved through the space, bay to bay, face to face, and then they stopped. They stopped on Diana. She was standing near the equipment alcove. She had not moved in 24 minutes. She was not looking at the patient, but her body had been angled precisely toward the gurney since the moment it came through the door, and she was holding a piece of equipment she had finished checking 17 minutes ago. Webb looked at her for a long moment. Diana felt the attention land. She did not look up. The man on the gurney said the 3 words again, weaker this time, not because he was losing consciousness, because he was losing the belief that anyone was going to answer him. Diana set the equipment down on the cart. She walked to the gurney, not fast, not slow. The walk of someone who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. Linda saw her first and started to say something. Diana raised one hand, 2 inches of motion, nothing more, and Linda went quiet without knowing why. Dr. Harmon turned. His expression assembled itself into the particular configuration of a man whose authority is being approached without an invitation. What exactly do you think you're— 30 seconds, Diana said. She did not look at him when she said it. She was already at the patient's side, her eyes on his face, her posture shifting in a way that was subtle enough that most people in the room couldn't have described it afterward. Something in the stillness of her hands, something in the quality of her attention. She leaned forward slightly and spoke. The words were not English. They were not the Arabic the first 7 interpreters had attempted. They were something older and more specific, shaped by a particular region, a particular altitude, the specific way that consonants soften at high elevation when the air is thin and language has to travel farther to carry meaning. The man on the gurney stopped moving. His eyes found her face. For the first time in 31 minutes, someone had answered him. He spoke. She listened. She spoke again. He answered faster, the words coming in a rush now, the relief in his voice almost physical, the audible unwinding of a man who had been locked in a silent room and had just heard the door open. The room had gone completely still. Dr. Harmon's pen was frozen above the clipboard. The residents weren't exchanging looks anymore. Webb had uncrossed his arms. Diana listened for 45 seconds without interrupting. Then she turned to the trauma physician, Dr. Elena Marsh, who had appeared at her shoulder at some point without Diana hearing her arrive, which told Diana something about her own current state of focus that she filed away to examine later. He has a documented allergy to cefazolin, Diana said, and her voice was the same voice she used to describe X-ray calibration, measured, informational, exact. He received a dose in the field. He's been trying to communicate this for the past 31 minutes. She paused one beat. He also says the bleeding started before the vehicle impact. There's a secondary wound on his left side, lower abdomen, that he treated himself in the field and did not report to the team because he didn't want to be pulled from the operation. Silence. Not long. The kind of silence that lasts exactly as long as it takes a room full of trained people to process new critical information and redirect. Dr. Marsh was already moving. The team organized itself around the new data with the efficiency of people who knew exactly what to do once they had what they needed. IV line protocol changed immediately. Ultrasound called for the secondary wound site. Diana stepped back from the gurney. She picked up the equipment she had set down. She turned back toward the alcove. "Hold on." The voice was low and controlled, and it belonged to Webb. She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. When she did, he was already watching her, his eyes steady in the way that took years to build and couldn't be performed. "What language was that?" he said. Diana looked at him for exactly 1 second. "Northern Levantine dialect," she said. "Specific regional inflection. Border area, high-altitude community." He was quiet for a moment. "Where does a radiology tech learn that?" Diana held his gaze. "I read a lot," she said. She turned and walked back to the alcove. Behind her, she heard him exhale once. Quiet, thoughtful. The exhale of a man who has just been given an answer that answered nothing. She picked up her equipment and went back to work. At 9:04, a second trauma came in. Different team. Army Rangers this time by the patches. 2 patients, one ambulatory and furious about it, the other on a gurney with a field splint on her left leg, and the particular pallor of someone who had been managing significant blood loss for long enough that her body had started making hard decisions about what to keep running. She was female, early 30s, the build that came from functional training over years. The tattoo on the inside of her right wrist, small, geometric, specific to a region that most people in this building had never visited. She was not American. Diana knew this before anyone said a word. The ranger sergeant at the head of the gurney was already talking to Linda. "She's a partner force liaison. 6 weeks embedded with our unit. 0 English. We've been operating on gesture and maybe 40 words of her language from one of our guys, and none of those words are medical." Linda looked at the gurney, then almost involuntarily toward the equipment alcove. The sergeant caught it. "Is there someone here who—" "We have a protocol," Dr. Harmon said, appearing again with his uncanny timing. He had evidently recovered from the first incident and reassembled his authority into something that looked like forward motion. "Language line first, then base interpreter services." "We tried base interpreter services on the way in," the sergeant said. The words came out flat, the way words come out when a person has already had a version of this conversation and is tired of having it again. "They don't have anyone cleared for this dialect. It's not Dari. It's not Pashto. It's something regional. Our guy says close, but not medical close." "Then we treat what we can observe and document what we cannot confirm," Dr. Harmon said. "That is the protocol." The sergeant looked at him. It was not an angry look. It was something more specific than anger. The look of a man who has spent years in environments where protocol is the tool you reach for after everything that actually works has already failed. He looked back at his patient. The woman on the gurney was talking, quietly, steadily, not panicked, not pleading, reporting. The cadence of a trained operator delivering information in sequence because that was what she had been trained to do. And the training did not stop working just because nobody in the room could receive the signal. Diana was at the suture supply station in Base 6. Her back was to the gurney. She counted suture packets. She did not need to count them. She counted to 14 anyway. The woman's voice changed. Not louder, tighter. The specific shift in tone that happens when information inside a sentence becomes urgent. Diana set the packets down. She walked to the gurney without deciding to walk to it. The decision had been made at 9:04 when the doors opened. She had simply been waiting for herself to catch up. Linda stepped aside without being asked. The sergeant assessed Diana as she approached. Neutral, rapid, the evaluation of someone who had learned to read people quickly and without sentiment. Diana leaned over the gurney. She spoke 4 words. The woman's eyes snapped to her face. She answered immediately. Fast, precise, efficient. The relief not emotional but tactical. The relief of a soldier who had found a working frequency and was going to transmit everything critical before it closed. Diana listened, asked 2 questions, listened again. Then she turned to Dr. Marsh, who was once again at her shoulder. The traction splint is correctly applied, but the fracture site is wrong. Pain is radiating from a secondary impact point approximately 4 centimeters proximal to where they position the splint. She paused. She also has lower abdominal rigidity. She didn't report it to the team because she wasn't asked directly, and she didn't want to compromise the mission timeline. She rates it 7 out of 10, but her baseline is high. Treat it as higher. Dr. Marsh was already moving. Get me an ultrasound. Possible internal bleeding. She can't localize it precisely, but she's describing increasing pressure. The room organized around the new information. Diana stepped back. She was almost clear of the gurney when the sergeant was beside her. "How many languages do you speak?" he said. "Enough," Diana said. "That dialect isn't something you get in a classroom." "No," she said, "it isn't." She moved a step around him. He shifted slightly, not blocking, just present. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to complicate your morning. I just need to know if you can stay close in case she needs to communicate something else while they're working." Diana looked at the gurney. The woman on it looked back. When their eyes met, the woman gave a single nod. Small, precise, the acknowledgement of one professional recognizing another across the particular distance that exists between people who have operated in the same world from opposite sides. "I'll be in base 6, Diana said. "If Marsh needs me, she knows where I am." She walked back to her station. She made it to 11 suture packets before Dr. Harmon appeared in the entrance to the bay. He stood with his arms folded and looked at her the way a man looks at something he cannot categorize and cannot put down. "Where is that coming from?" he said. "Where is what coming from?" "Don't be obtuse." His voice dropped slightly, not softer, more concentrated. 2 patients, 2 different dialects, 40 minutes. That does not happen. That is not a thing that simply happens. Diana placed the last suture packet in line. "It happened," she said. "I pulled your personnel file an hour ago." He paused to let that register. Radiology certification from a Tennessee program. 2.5 years at a regional hospital outside Nashville. 1 year at a VA clinic in Columbus. No international postings. No military background documented. No language training of any kind. Diana said nothing. "That file," Dr. Harmon said slowly, "does not describe what I watched you do twice this morning." She turned to face him. She kept her expression exactly where she needed it. Neutral, mildly tired, the expression of a person who has been on their feet since before 7 and would prefer to remain on them productively. "People are more than their files, Dr. Harmon," she said. His jaw shifted. "I'm going to need more of an explanation than that. And I'm going to need to finish restocking base 6, she said. 2 trauma cases in 40 minutes. We're running low on supply, and someone has used the last of the cefazolin without logging it, which given this morning is the kind of detail that actually matters." She turned back to the cart. He stood in the doorway for 8 seconds. Then his pager went off. He looked at it. He looked at her. He left. Diana exhaled once, slowly and controlled. Webb was still in the building. She had tracked him at 8:53, standing near the family waiting area with a cup of coffee he had not touched, watching the corridor that led to the trauma bays. He was not waiting on news about his operator. She could tell by the angle of his posture. He already knew his man was stable. He was watching the corridor for a different reason. She recognized that look. She had worn it herself in rooms on 4 continents in the past 13 years. It was the look of someone assembling a picture from incomplete pieces and understanding that the picture was almost finished. She looked down at her hands on the supply cart. They were steady, completely, professionally steady. That was the problem with everything she had done this morning. Invisible people did not have steady hands when trauma came through a door. They stepped back. They deferred. They looked for someone with a title and a badge and let that person carry the weight. She had not done any of those things. In 43 minutes, she had walked to 2 gurneys, translated 2 critical medical histories, corrected 2 diagnoses, and made a chief physician uncomfortable enough to pull her personnel file before his second cup of coffee. 19 days of invisible, 43 minutes of necessary. She picked up the empty supply bin and moved toward the corridor. When she passed the waiting area, Webb did not say anything, but he raised his coffee cup slightly in her direction. A small, precise gesture, the kind of acknowledgement that people from a certain world gave each other when words were the wrong instrument. She did not respond, but she felt her jaw tighten once before she controlled it. Down the corridor, the ultrasound was being wheeled toward the bay, where the partner force liaison was being assessed for internal bleeding. The information Diana had translated had arrived in time to matter. That was enough. She told herself that. She turned the corner and kept walking. There are people who are exactly what they appear to be. And then there are people like Diana Cole. The question is not which kind you'd rather meet. The question is which kind has already been standing next to you for 19 days, quiet and steady, and waiting for the moment when necessary outweighed invisible. She had not wanted to be necessary this morning. She had not had a choice. And somewhere down that corridor, a man with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched was beginning to understand that the difference between those two things was the most important detail in the room. She ate lunch at 12:11. Vending machine coffee, black. A sandwich she had made at 5:40 that morning, slightly flattened on one side from the supply bag. She sat with her back to the wall and her face toward the door, the way she always sat, the way she had tried once to stop sitting and lasted 4 minutes before the discomfort became louder than the effort to change it. Some habits don't break. They just learn to be quiet. The break room had a window that faced the parking lot. Through it, she could see the black government-issue SUV parked at an angle that was not a parking space, but had a direct line of sight to the main entrance. Webb hadn't left. She had clocked him 12 minutes ago. She took a bite of her sandwich and thought about what that meant. It meant he was still building the picture. Linda had found her at 10:30 with an expression that lived somewhere between worry and fascination, and said very quietly that Dr. Harmon had made 2 phone calls from his office with the door closed, which almost never happened, and that one of them had gone 11 minutes. Diana had thanked her and gone back to work. Now she sat with her coffee and ran the calculation she already knew the answer to. The allergy flag on patient 1, the splenic laceration on patient 2, caught early enough to avoid surgical intervention. Good outcomes, both of them. She should feel good about that. She did feel good about that. She also felt the particular weight of a woman who had spent 13 years building something careful and quiet, and had spent 43 minutes this morning dismantling it, one language at a time. She finished her sandwich, folded the paper bag into a precise rectangle, and placed it in the trash. Here is something true about people who do extraordinary things and then try to walk away from them. The thing doesn't stay where you left it. It follows you back into the room and sits down across from you without asking. The break room door opened at 12:23. It was not Linda. Webb walked in carrying a fresh cup of coffee from the machine in the family waiting area, which meant he had been in the building long enough to finish the first one and decided the second was worth staying for. He looked at her. She looked at him. He gestured toward the empty chair across from her with the kind of courtesy that was genuine and also not optional. She did not stand. She did not reach for anything. She kept both hands visible on the table, which was its own kind of language, and waited. He sat down. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Outside, a supply truck was backing up to the loading dock. The beeping was distant and rhythmic and belonged to a completely different world. "Your patient is stable," he said. "They're saying the allergy flag saved his life. Whatever was in the IV line they had queued up would have caused anaphylactic shock within the hour." "Good," Diana said. "The other one, the partner force asset, they found a grade 2 splenic laceration. Caught it early, she's going to be fine." "I heard." He nodded once, took a sip of his coffee and set it down with the deliberateness of a man who is organizing his next sentence before releasing it. "You've been here 19 days. "Correct. Before this, Tennessee. That's in the file. Your file, he said carefully, says a lot of things that don't account for what happened in those trauma bays this morning. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. The posture of a man who has decided that directness is the right tool and is committing to it. Northern Levantine dialect with a border corridor inflection. That's what you told me. You said it the way someone reads coordinates off a map, not like someone who studied it, like someone who learned it in the place it comes from. Diana looked at him over the rim of her cup. And the second language, he continued, I had one of my guys pull the audio from the trauma bay camera while you were at lunch. He paused to let that land. He's been operating in that region for 4 years. He said what you spoke wasn't just the language. It was the specific register used by trained personnel in that region. Not civilians, not aid workers, trained personnel. The beeping from the loading dock stopped. The break room went very quiet. Diana set her coffee cup down precisely in the center of the napkin she had placed under it. The trauma bays have audio now, she said. New installation. Most of the staff doesn't know yet. She noted that, filed it. Am I in some kind of trouble? She said. And here is what you need to understand about that question. She already knew the answer. She was asking it to hear how he responded, to learn what he prioritized, whether he reached for authority or for something else entirely. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. You saved 2 lives this morning using skills that your personnel file says you shouldn't have. Nobody who matters is interested in making problems for someone who just did that. He paused. But someone is interested in understanding it. You, she said. Yes, he said simply. Diana looked at the window, at the parking lot, at the black SUV that was still not in a parking space. I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer it straight. All right? The phone calls Harmon made this morning, the ones with the door closed. She paused. Did anyone call you, or did you make the decision to stay on your own? Something moved in his expression, controlled but present. He was surprised, not by the question, but by the fact that she had known to ask it. My own decision, he said. She studied his face for 3 full seconds. He was telling the truth. She had spent years reading faces in rooms where the wrong read had consequences, and he was telling the truth. She picked up her coffee. Then I appreciate you being direct, she said, and I appreciate what you said about your operator. She stood. He looked up at her from the chair, still patient, still assembled. That's it? I have a shift to finish, she said. Diana. She stopped. He had used her first name, not her last, not her title. Her first name dropped into the conversation with the deliberateness of a man who understood exactly what that choice communicated. She waited. Whatever is in that file that doesn't match what I watched you do this morning, he said quietly, it doesn't change what happened. Those 2 people are alive because of you. He paused. In the world I come from, that matters more than paperwork. She stood with her back to him for a moment. Down the corridor, someone was laughing. A real laugh, brief and easy, the kind that only happens when a shift is going well and everyone in the building knows it. In the world I come from too, she said. She walked out. Behind her, she heard him exhale, slow, deliberate, the breath of a man who had just confirmed something he had been building toward since 8:23 this morning. She turned the corner and moved back toward her station. Her hands were steady. They had been steady all morning. That was still the problem. That was still the thing she could not undo. At 1:47, Dr. Harmon found her in the equipment storage room, running end-of-shift inventory on the portable units. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood in the doorway the way people stand when they've rehearsed what they're going to say and arrived at the moment to say it, and found the words rearranging themselves without permission. I called your last posting in Tennessee, he said. I was looking for inconsistencies. Diana continued her inventory without turning around. The director of nursing told me that in 14 months at that facility, You had the lowest patient complication rate of any floor staff. That you flagged 2 medication errors the attending physicians had already signed off on. That when they offered you a senior role, you declined without explanation and submitted a transfer request the same week. He paused. She also told me that the week before you left, there was an incident in the parking structure. A woman being assaulted. Security footage shows the situation was resolved in approximately 35 seconds by a bystander in scrubs who kept her back to every camera in the lot and never filed a report. The portable unit clicked under Diana's hands. She noted the calibration reading and moved to the next. "I was not looking for the right things this morning," Harmon said. The words came out with the particular texture of a man saying something that did not come naturally to him. "I saw a file that didn't match what I was watching, and I made it about me, about my department, about what it would mean if someone had been placed here without my knowledge." He stopped. He seemed to be locating something inside himself. "If those 2 cases had proceeded without your intervention," he said, "we would have lost the first patient before noon. The second would have required emergency surgical intervention with a significantly compromised outcome." Another pause. "I owe you an apology." Diana turned around. She looked at him, the expensive pen in his coat pocket. The same man who had handed a clipboard to Linda at 6:58 without looking up. The same man who had told her she was neither rookie nor veteran, with the easy certainty of someone who had never once been wrong about a person in a way that cost him anything. "You were working with the information you had," she said. "That's generous. It's accurate. The file was designed to produce exactly the response you had. That's not your failure. That's the point." He processed that for a moment. "Are you staying?" She looked at the portable unit in her hands. She thought about the sound of a language being recognized in a room full of people who don't speak it. The specific way a person's face changes when someone finally answers. Not gratitude exactly. Something older than gratitude. The relief of being heard. "I don't know yet," she said. It was the most honest thing she had said all day. He nodded once and turned to leave. She watched him until he disappeared around the corner. At 2:19, the charge desk radio went off again. Diana heard it from the equipment alcove and felt the corridor shift the way it had shifted at 8:17. That same pressure change. That same organized acceleration beneath the surface of professional calm. But this one was different. This one wasn't trauma incoming. This one was a name, a unit designation, a request for specific personnel to report to the trauma bay immediately, phrased in the clipped economy of people who don't make that kind of request unless the situation has already passed the point where standard resources are enough. Webb's name was in the transmission. Diana set down her inventory sheet. She was already moving when Linda appeared at the alcove entrance, slightly out of breath, with the expression of someone carrying information they don't fully understand, but understand is important. "They're asking for you," Linda said, "specifically, not through Harmon, through the base." "Which bay?" "2," Linda said. "And Diana, there's a woman, federal. She came in about 8 minutes ago. No ID visible. She went straight to Harmon's office, and Harmon came out of that meeting looking like someone had rearranged the furniture while he wasn't watching." Diana was already past her. Bay 2 had been cleared. Not the way bays get cleared for trauma, systematically, with purpose. The way a space gets cleared when the nature of what's happening inside it has moved beyond standard medical protocol. The residents were gone. The support staff was gone. The door to the adjoining bay was closed. Webb was inside. Beside him stood a woman Diana didn't recognize. Civilian clothes, but federal posture. The squared shoulders. The specific stillness. The way she had positioned herself with sight lines to both the door and the far wall. Dark jacket. No visible ID. The particular quality of attention that only comes from years of training that doesn't announce itself. The woman looked at Diana when she walked in. Not the assessing look that most people gave her. A confirming look. The look of someone checking a box they already expected to check. "My name is Reeves," the woman said. No title, no agency, just the name, placed in the air between them like something that had weight. "I'm here because of what happened in this building this morning." Diana looked at Webb. He met her eyes and gave nothing away, which was itself information. "Both incidents," Reeves continued, "the dialects you used, the outcomes you produced." She opened a folder on the side table without looking at it. "The specific regional variants you demonstrated this morning are not available in any academic program in this country. The only documented training for those language branches operates under federal classification." The bay was very quiet. Diana said, "Is there something you want to ask me directly?" Reeves looked at her for a long moment. "We already know," she said. 2 words, placed with the precision of someone who understood exactly what they would do to the air in the room. Diana kept her face exactly where she needed it. "We've known for 16 days, Reeves said. "We weren't certain until this morning, but we suspected from day 4. A physician flagged your triage pattern. Your assessments were consistently faster and more accurate than your documented training should allow. We started watching." She paused. "More carefully than you realized." Diana thought about the new resident, the one she hadn't been able to place, the one who had seemed thorough in a way that felt different from the usual thorough. She revised that assessment entirely. So the resident had not been new, he had been placed. "So this isn't a disciplinary conversation," Diana said. "No," Reeves said. "It isn't." She closed the folder. "There is a situation developing. 40 minutes from this building, 3 individuals in a location we can reach physically but cannot reach linguistically. 2 are American contractors taken during a compromised equipment transfer. The 3rd is a partner force liaison officer." She paused. "Eastern dialect branch. Specific regional variant." Diana said nothing. "Our window is closing," Reeves said. "We need someone who speaks what you speak, the way you speak it." The air in the room sat completely still. Outside, somewhere below the building, the sound of the ambulance bay filtered up through the walls. Ordinary noise from an ordinary afternoon in a building that had been anything but ordinary since 8:17 this morning. "I'm a radiology technician," Diana said. "You are," Reeves said. "You are also the only person within operational range with the specific capability this situation requires." Diana looked at Webb. He was watching her with the steady patience of a man who had already done whatever pushing he was going to do and was now waiting on her. She looked at the door, at the corridor beyond it, at the supply cart still parked outside Base 6, exactly where she had left it. 13 years, 19 days, 43 minutes of necessary. "What's the timeline?" she said. Reeves checked her watch. "We need to move in 9 minutes." Diana stood. She looked at Reeves for exactly 2 seconds. "Someone needs to tell Linda that the portable unit in Bay 8 is running low on contrast supply. She won't catch it until end of shift, and by then, it'll be too late to restock before morning." Reeves blinked once. "I'll make sure she knows." Diana walked to the door. Webb fell into step beside her without being asked. She didn't tell him not to. They moved through the corridor together, past the charge desk where Linda was already watching with the expression of a woman who understood that what she was watching was not something she was supposed to ask about. Past Bay 6, past the equipment alcove, through the ambulance bay doors and into the afternoon. The black SUV was running. A second vehicle behind it, both pointed toward the exit. Diana got in. The door closed. Through the window, the building she had spent 19 days making herself small inside grew smaller in the side mirror. She watched it until it was gone. Then she turned forward. Whatever came next was not invisible. Whatever came next was not quiet. Whatever came next was the thing she had spent 13 years telling herself she had walked away from. And it had been sitting here the whole time. 19 days and 43 minutes away, waiting for her to stop pretending otherwise. She had made herself invisible because she chose to, not because she forgot what she was. The SUV accelerated. The building disappeared. She began to prepare. The SUV moved fast through the kind of afternoon that didn't know anything unusual was happening. Traffic lights changing, people pulling into gas stations. A school bus stopped on the right lane with its red lights swinging. Reeves sat in the front with a tablet and a phone, and the controlled economy of movement that came from years of operating in situations where every gesture had a cost. Webb sat beside Diana in the back with a physical floor plan drawn from memory by someone who had been inside the building once, briefly, under duress. Approximate. Diana had worked with Approximate before. 2 American contractors, Reeves said without turning around. Communications specialists. Taken during a routine equipment transfer that went sideways when a former base employee decided his loyalties were negotiable. She scrolled something on the tablet. The third individual is the partner force liaison. Different unit from your patient this morning, but same regional background. Eastern Branch. Callaway, my supervisor, assessed it as close enough to the dialect variance you demonstrated. She assessed wrong, Diana said. Reeves turned then, halfway, just enough to see Diana's face. It's not close enough, Diana said. Eastern Branch split significantly at the subdialect level. What your patient this morning spoke and what this liaison officer speaks are related the way 2 cousins are related. Recognizable family resemblance, not interchangeable. She looked at the floor plan in Webb's hands. If your team went in there trying to use one to approximate the other, she would have known immediately. That's probably part of why the window is closing. The front seat was quiet for 2 full seconds. You knew this, Reeves said. It wasn't a question. You told me the dialect branch, Diana said. I didn't correct you because you didn't need the correction to make the decision. You needed a reason to make it. Those are different things. Webb exhaled beside her. Almost a sound, not quite. Reeves turned back to the front. A beat of silence passed, the kind that happens when someone has just recalibrated their understanding of the person they brought into the vehicle and is deciding what to do with the updated information. Walk me through what you're proposing, she said. Radio contact first. I speak to her directly, not the protocol, not the extraction script. Something that establishes I'm a real person, not a recording, not a script. Something with geography in it. Diana looked at the floor plan again. She's been in there with people who cannot communicate with her for... She glanced at the clock on the dash. How long? Confirmed hold started at 11:40, Webb said. So approximately 2 hours 40 minutes. Then she's past afraid and into calculating, Diana said. She's been running assessments the entire time. Who's inside? How many? What they want? Whether the people on the outside who are supposed to come for her actually know where she is. She paused. She doesn't trust the extraction protocol because she has no way to verify it's real. Anyone can transmit a code phrase. Not anyone can speak the way she speaks from a place she recognizes as true. And you think she'll recognize it? Reeves said. I think she'll listen. Listening is where it starts. The vehicle slowed. They were 2 blocks out. Through the windshield, Diana could see the shape of the warehouse district. Working buildings, active, the kind of location that was worse than abandoned because active meant schedules, and schedules meant the window was biological, contracting with every passing minute, regardless of what anyone decided. Reeves turned fully in her seat. The afternoon light from the windshield put her face in partial shadow. If this goes wrong, it won't, Diana said. Not arrogance, the flat delivery of someone making a structural assessment. Your current plan has already failed. You have an extraction team in position who cannot move because the one person who needs to confirm her status and location cannot communicate with anyone you've deployed. You've been at this for, she did the math, approximately 40 minutes since your last viable contact window. Whatever you were trying before I got in this vehicle, it wasn't working. I'm not offering you certainty. I'm offering you a different approach. Reeves held her gaze for 5 full seconds. Then she turned to the front. Webb, she said. Already have it, he said. He was holding the radio. The vehicle stopped half a block from the warehouse, behind a utility truck that provided natural cover from the east-facing windows. Webb handed Diana the radio and a set of earpieces. She put them in, adjusted the frequency, and held the transmit button without pressing it. She thought about the woman on the gurney that morning, the nod she had given across the bay. Small, precise. The nod of someone who had learned to communicate in compressed signals because the rooms she operated in rarely gave her more space than that. She pressed transmit. She did not use the protocol. She used a greeting, regional, specific, the kind of phrase that carried altitude inside it. The sound of a particular morning in a particular part of the world, the way people in that region opened a conversation when they wanted the other person to understand immediately that they were speaking to someone who had been there. Not read about it, not studied it, been there. Static. Reeves's posture in the front seat was stone. Webb was watching Diana's face. She waited. 12 seconds. 13. Then a voice came through the earpiece. Female. Steady. The specific caution of a trained person testing each word before releasing it. Not afraid, but precise in the way that people are precise when they have been in a room for 2 hours and 40 minutes with armed individuals and have been using every second to assess and calculate and prepare. She said 3 sentences. Diana felt something settle in her chest. The particular sensation of a frequency finding its match, the relief of it, the almost physical relief of being understood by someone who had no earthly reason to trust the situation that had delivered her to this moment. She answered. She spoke for 90 seconds without pausing. She did not use the protocol. She described the extraction team's position using terms that a soldier from that region would recognize as specific. The kind of detail that fabricated reassurance doesn't include, because fabricated reassurance is built for people who don't know the difference. She named the 2 contractors by name. She said the window was closing. She said the decision to trust or not trust belonged entirely to the woman on the other end of the radio, that no one was going to make it for her, and that the voice she was hearing had spent the morning in a military trauma bay keeping 2 people alive, and that was the only credential being offered. She released the transmit button. Silence. Webb had stopped breathing, or it seemed that way. Reeves had not moved. 19 seconds. Then the liaison officer's voice came back through the earpiece. Clear, decisive, no longer testing. She had made her assessment and she had decided. And when trained people decide, they commit fully and without hesitation. She gave coordinates, room position, the number of individuals holding them, 5, not the 4 that thermal imaging had shown 40 minutes ago, which meant someone had entered the building in the last window, and the intelligence was already outdated. She gave the location of a secondary exit on the north wall that did not appear on the hand-drawn floor plan. Diana was already transmitting to Webb before the liaison officer finished her 3rd sentence. Webb was on the secondary channel to the extraction team before Diana finished her 2nd. Reeves was on the phone. The vehicle became a controlled hub of overlapping transmissions, each one clipped and exact. The language of people who understood that the difference between a sentence and a half sentence in this context was measured in outcomes that could not be undone. The next 4 minutes did not belong to Diana. She sat with the radio in her hand and listened to the controlled language of an extraction in progress. Brief confirmations, position updates, the particular sound of a team that had been waiting in position and was now moving through a space it finally understood. She tracked it through the transmissions. Entry point confirmed. Secondary exit confirmed. 5 individuals located, 4 in the hold room, 1 mobile. Contractors positively identified. Liaison officer positively identified. No shots fired. At 4:31, the transmission came through that closed the window. All 5 hostiles secured, all 3 individuals out, extraction team consolidating at the northwest corner. Reeves lowered her phone. She turned in her seat and looked at Diana for a long, quiet moment. "The dialect branch," she said finally. "You knew from the moment I described it." "Yes," Diana said, "and you didn't correct me." "You needed to make a decision," Diana said, "not a linguistics lesson." Reeves was quiet. Outside the vehicle, the extraction team was moving the contractors toward a second vehicle across the lot. Through the window, Diana could see the liaison officer being helped toward the same vehicle, walking, unassisted after the first few steps, her posture still military despite everything the last 3 hours had delivered to her. At the edge of the lot, the woman stopped. She turned. She looked directly at the black SUV. She could not see through the glass. She didn't know which window or which face. But she raised her hand, flat palm, brief, the gesture of one soldier acknowledging another across a distance that language can approach but never fully cross. Diana did not raise her hand back, but her eyes stayed on the woman until the team moved her forward and she was gone around the side of the building. Webb had been watching Diana. 11 years, he said quietly. Not a question this time, a statement, an arrival. 13, Diana said. He looked at her. CIA, he said. She looked at him. She did not confirm it. She did not deny it. He nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who had worked long enough in adjacent worlds to understand that some confirmations were not his to receive, and that the understanding between them didn't require the word to be spoken. The vehicle started moving. Diana looked out the window at the afternoon light moving across buildings as they passed. She thought about 13 years of careful, 19 days of invisible, 43 minutes of necessary, and the 4 minutes that had just happened, which did not fit cleanly into any of those categories. Reeves spoke without turning around. "There's a conversation we need to have," she said. "Not today, but soon." "I know," Diana said. "Calloway, my supervisor, will want to speak with you directly. She'll give you time to consider what she's proposing." "How much time?" "A week," Reeves said. Diana looked at the window. The medical center appeared on the horizon, growing larger as the SUV moved toward it. She watched the building come into focus, the same building she had spent 19 days making herself small inside, the same fluorescent lights visible through the ambulance bay windows, the same supply cart probably still parked outside Bay 6 where she'd left it. "What's she offering?" Diana said. "Formally, a translational support role, high-complexity situations. You'd stay attached to the medical center as primary cover. The actual function would be broader." Reeves paused. "Unofficially, she asked me to tell you that what you did today, both things, the trauma bays and this, cannot be replicated by anyone else currently in our inventory." "Inventory," Diana said. "Her word. I don't love it either." Webb glanced at Diana. "The situations will keep happening," he said. "The language barriers will keep costing us. The windows will keep closing before the right person can get in position." He let that sit for a moment. "You've been running for 13 years. "I haven't been running," Diana said. "No? Running is when you leave because you can't stay. I left because I chose something else." "What did you choose?" She looked at the building in the windshield, at the ambulance bay doors getting closer, at the ordinary afternoon of a place that had been anything but ordinary since she had set down a piece of calibration equipment at 8:17 and walked to a gurney she had told herself was not her assignment. "Quiet," she said. "I chose quiet." Webb nodded. He didn't push it. The SUV pulled into the lot at 5:12. Diana got out. The air was cooler than when she'd left, the afternoon tilting toward evening. The quality of light changed in the way it changes in the last hour before dark, when everything gets slightly more honest about what it is. She walked through the ambulance bay doors. The fluorescent lights hummed exactly as they had at 7 in the morning. The supply cart was outside Bay 6. Linda was at the charge desk, And when she looked up and saw Diana, the expression on her face was the expression of a woman watching someone return from a country she cannot name and knows better than to ask about. Bay 7 is fine, Linda said immediately. Doctor, Marsh checked the oxygen levels an hour ago. He's stable. Good, Diana said. She picked up the clipboard from the desk. 2 new patients in the last 3 hours, both assigned and covered. The afternoon had continued without her. The building had kept moving in the particular way buildings keep moving when the people inside them are good at their work and don't need any one person to be their entire foundation. She should have found that comforting. She did find it comforting. She also found it the loneliest kind of fact there was. She moved toward Bay 6. She was almost to the supply cart when she heard a voice behind her. Ms. Cole. Not Linda. Not Webb. She turned. Dr. Harmon was standing at the entrance to the corridor. He had his coat on. End of shift, she noted. He had stayed past his own hours. His arms were not folded, which was different. He was holding his coat closed at the front with one hand, the posture of a man who is cold somewhere that has nothing to do with temperature. He looked at her. She waited. I owe you a second apology, he said. The first one was for this morning. This one is for the calls I made after. He paused. I contacted the base administration after you left with that woman. I was trying to find out what I had missed, what was happening in my department without my knowledge. He stopped, reorganized. What I found was that whatever you are doing here, it is not happening to my department. It is happening for something larger than my department. And I spent half the morning making it about me. Diana looked at him. You were protecting your people, she said. I was protecting my authority, he said. That's different, and I know the difference. The expensive pen was in his coat pocket, cap visible above the edge. The same pen, the same man. Something in between them had shifted, though. Not dramatically, not irreversibly, but genuinely. The kind of shift that happens when a person decides to be honest about what they have done and what it cost someone else. Are you all right? He said. The question surprised her. Not because it was unexpected, because it was real. No agenda in it, no investigation. Just a man asking a woman who had just come back from somewhere he didn't have clearance to understand whether she was all right. Yes, she said. He nodded, turned to go, then stopped. For what it's worth, he said without looking back, I would have been lucky to have you here for real, under any file. He walked down the corridor and turned the corner and was gone. Diana stood with her hand on the supply cart. She stood there for a moment longer than she needed to. The fluorescent lights hummed above her. Somewhere past the ambulance bay, the evening was beginning to happen. The sky shifting in the specific way it shifts when a day has been too full to end cleanly and needs a moment to find its footing. She picked up the inventory sheet. She started counting. She had made it to 8 when the ambulance bay doors opened behind her, and the particular quality of the silence that followed told her who had walked in before she turned around. Webb. Out of kit now, civilian jacket, gray, moving the same way he always moved, which said everything about him that needed to be said. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He held one out toward her. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. They stood in the alcove next to the supply cart with their coffee and the inventory sheet between them, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had been in the same vehicle and heard the same transmissions and understood the same things and didn't need to perform any of it for each other. Reeves wants to brief you formally next week, Webb said. I know. She's good at what she does, he said. Calloway too. The offer is real. Diana looked at the inventory sheet. She looked at the clipboard. She looked at the supply cart with its ordered rows and its restocked shelves, and the particular small satisfaction of a workspace that was exactly where it needed to be. What did the liaison officer ask, Diana said, when the team was processing her? Webb was quiet for a moment. She asked if the voice on the radio was a soldier. He said. Diana looked at him. They told her yes, he said, because nobody could come up with a more accurate word. The fluorescent lights hummed. The evening pressed gently against the ambulance bay windows. Diana held her coffee with both hands and looked at nothing in particular and thought about a word that was accurate. About 13 years of carrying something in a pocket. About the particular weight of a thing you have not put down, because putting it down would require admitting that you were still holding it. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs. She pulled out a pin. Small, nondescript to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. A specific design, a specific agency, a specific level of operational clearance compressed into a piece of metal small enough to disappear in a closed fist. She had carried it for 13 years. Not out of sentiment, out of something more complicated than that. The way soldiers carry things from wars that are technically over, but never quite finish resolving themselves in the body. She placed it on the inventory sheet between them. Webb looked down at it. He was still for a moment, then he looked up at her. That doesn't mean what I think it means, he said. Not a question, something closer to a careful hope. It means, Diana said, that I'm tired of carrying it in my pocket. She picked up her clipboard. She walked back toward the corridor. She did not pick the pin back up. She left it on the inventory sheet next to 2 cups of coffee, in an equipment log, in a supply alcove of a military medical center. And she walked away from it the way you walk away from something you have been holding for so long that the absence of the weight feels like its own kind of answer. At 6:10, she clocked out. She changed in the locker room, folded her scrubs with the precision of someone who had learned to fold things under pressure in places where neatness was not optional but survival adjacent. She was almost to the exit when Linda caught her at the main corridor junction, slightly out of breath, with the look of someone who had been waiting for the right moment and had just decided this was it. There's someone asking for you at the front desk, Linda said. She came in about 20 minutes ago. She said she'd wait. A pause. She doesn't speak much English, but she said your name clearly. She said it like she'd been practicing it. Diana stopped. She turned slowly. She looked at Linda's face for 2 full seconds, reading it the way she had learned to read faces. Not for what people said, but for what their expressions were doing underneath the words. Linda was not alarmed. Linda was curious in the way that people are curious when they have witnessed something all day that they don't have the vocabulary to name. Diana walked to the front desk. The woman sitting in the chair by the entrance was the liaison officer from the warehouse, still in the same clothes she had been wearing when the extraction team brought her out. A bandage on her left forearm that had not been there at the warehouse. Her posture was military, despite the plastic chair and the waiting room and the complete incongruity of everything around her. She stood when Diana came into view. They looked at each other across the waiting room. 12 feet of fluorescent-lit government carpet between them, and more than that, and both of them knew it. The liaison officer reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. She produced a folded piece of paper. She held it out with both hands, a deliberate gesture, the kind that carries formality in certain cultures, the offering of something that matters. Diana crossed the room and took it. She unfolded it. It was a photograph, old, slightly creased along lines that suggested it had been folded and unfolded many times over many years by hands that needed to look at it repeatedly. It showed 2 women in military gear standing in front of a vehicle in a landscape that was unmistakably the region. The quality of the light, the elevation, the particular flatness of the horizon. Both were squinting into the sun. Both were armed. Both were young in the specific way that people are young before certain things happen to them, and after which young is never quite the right word again. One of the women Diana did not recognize. The other one, she did. She looked up from the photograph. The liaison officer pointed to the unrecognized woman. Then she placed her hand flat on her own chest. Her mother. The unrecognized woman was her mother. And the woman Diana recognized, the one standing beside her in tactical gear, with the sun in her eyes and something in her expression that was half amusement and half absolute focus, was the woman who had recruited Diana 13 years ago, who had trained her, who had run her through 6 years of operations in places that officially did not exist, who had told her on the last day, in a room in a building with no official address, that the work they had done together would continue in ways neither of them would be able to see or measure, and that this was not failure. This was how real work moved through the world. The woman who had died, officially, in a non-incident, in a non-location, in a year with no public record. Diana stood in the fluorescent light of a military medical center waiting room and held a photograph of 2 young soldiers squinting into the afternoon sun of a country that had changed both of them in ways that didn't show up on any personnel file ever written. Her hands were not entirely steady. That was the first time all day. The liaison officer spoke one sentence, quiet, deliberate, the words placed carefully, the way you place something fragile on a surface you're not sure will hold it. Diana understood every word. She said, "If we ever found you, we were to tell you the work is not finished." The waiting room was very quiet. Linda had disappeared behind the charge desk with the tact of a woman who understood that what she was witnessing was not hers to witness. The overhead lights hummed their indifferent hum. Somewhere outside, a vehicle was pulling out of the lot. Diana looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases, the ones worn soft from years of handling, and placed it in the pocket of her jacket. She looked at the liaison officer, and for the first time since 6:58 that morning, since 19 days ago, since a point in time 13 years back that she had long since stopped marking on any internal calendar, Diana Cole smiled. It was not a large smile, not the kind that fills rooms or resolves movies. It was small and specific, and it belonged to a person who had just understood something that had been waiting a very long time to be understood. The work was not finished. It had simply been waiting for her to stop pretending she had left it behind. She looked at the exit doors. She looked back at the liaison officer. "Are you hungry?" she said. The woman blinked. She had understood enough. She nodded. They walked out together into the evening, and behind them, the building exhaled its ordinary fluorescent hum into the ordinary dark, and nothing about the lobby or the parking lot or the cooling air suggested that anything extraordinary had just happened in the space between 2 women and a folded photograph. That was the thing about extraordinary. It rarely announced itself. It just stood there, quiet and complete, waiting to be recognized. Webb found the pin at 6:47 when he went back to the supply alcove to finish the coffee he had left there. He had known it was still there. He had not gone back immediately because he had understood, without being told, that there was a version of this moment that needed to happen without him in the room for it. He picked it up, held it in his palm, looked at it for a long moment in the particular way that people look at objects that represent more than their physical dimensions. Then he smiled, slowly, the way people smile when a story turns out to be longer and better than they expected. He placed it carefully in his jacket pocket. He had a feeling she would need it back. He had a feeling it would not be long. The next morning, Diana arrived at 6:53, 7 minutes early. She moved her equipment cart to the east corridor and began her morning inventory. Lead aprons, portable units, contrast supplies. The small, ordered world of a workspace that expected nothing from her except competence and showed up the same way every morning, regardless of what the day before had been. She was recalibrating the portable unit outside Bay 3 when she heard footsteps behind her that she recognized before she turned around. The specific weight distribution of someone who had learned to move quietly in operational environments and never quite stopped. Webb, 6:58, also early. He had 2 cups of coffee. He held one out. She took it without commentary. They stood in the corridor for a moment before shift started, drinking their coffee, watching the morning team filter in, and neither of them said anything about the previous afternoon, because everything that needed to be said about the previous afternoon had already been said in the alcove, and in the parking lot, and in the particular way the pin had been left and found. Reeves confirmed the meeting, Webb said. Thursday, 1400. I know, Diana said. She sent word through the base liaison this morning. He looked at her. You're not surprised. I'm not, she said. Are you going to go? She took a sip of her coffee. I'm thinking about it. What's there to think about, he said, not pushing, genuinely asking. Diana looked at the corridor, at the morning light coming through the far window, the particular quality of early light in a building that had been running all night and was now transitioning into daytime. 13 years ago, she said, I made a choice that I told myself was permanent. I built a life on top of it. I got very good at maintaining it. She paused. Yesterday took about 43 minutes to dismantle most of it. 43 minutes, he said, give or take. He was quiet for a moment. You know what I've noticed about people who are genuinely good at something? He said. The ones who are really good, not just trained good, they don't stop being what they are because they change the context. They just find new rooms to be it in. Diana looked at him. You weren't invisible yesterday, he said. You were exactly what you are, in a different room. She didn't answer that, but she didn't look away either. At 7:02, the charge desk radio crackled. Routine update, morning briefing. The ordinary machinery of a new day settling into its rhythm. Linda appeared at the desk, coffee in hand, giving Diana a small look that said, I saw what I saw yesterday, and I have decided to be professionally discreet about all of it, and you're welcome. Diana gave her a nod that communicated she understood and appreciated it. At 7:19, Dr. Harmon arrived. He walked in without the particular stiffness she had noted on every previous morning. The armor of it, the costume quality of a man putting authority on like a coat before he engaged with the world. He looked at Diana. She looked at him. He gave a short, precise nod. She returned it. That was all. That was, somehow, everything. He went to his office without handing any clipboards to anyone, without looking up. Linda blinked, looked at Diana. Diana went back to her equipment. At 8:40, a single gurney came through the ambulance bay doors. No escort, no drama. A training injury, compound fracture, tibia, a young soldier who had landed wrong during a routine exercise and was in significant pain and not entirely successful at concealing it. Diana was first in position. She spoke to him while they moved him through intake, keeping her voice level and informational, her hands efficient, her attention on him and not on the paperwork. On a scale of 1 to 10, she said. 6, he said through his teeth. You're at an 8, she said. At least, and that's fine. Tell the physician 8. He looked at her. How do you know? Because you're holding your breath between sentences, she said. 6s breathe. He exhaled. 8, he said. Maybe 9. Better, she said. She handed him off to the attending and went back to her station. Webb was in the corridor. He had seen the exchange. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. At 10:15, Reeves called, not to the charge desk, directly to the base liaison line, which then routed to the department administrator, which then found Diana in the equipment room running her mid-morning calibration check. The administrator handed her the phone with the expression of someone who had been asked to do something they had not been trained for and was handling it with maximum professionalism. Diana took the phone. Thursday is confirmed, Reeves said. Calloway will be present. It will be informal. Not a debrief, not a recruitment interview, a conversation. All right, Diana said. There's something else. A pause, brief, controlled, but present. The liaison officer, the one from yesterday. What about her? She's been asking questions about you, Reeves said, specifically about your background. She's been working with our interpreter this morning, and she's been persistent. Another pause. She says she has more information. About the photograph she gave you. About the woman in it. Diana's hand tightened on the phone. Just slightly. Just once. What kind of information? She said. She won't say through an intermediary, Reeves said. She says it has to be direct. She says the person who needs to hear it is the person the photograph was meant for. The equipment room was very quiet. Where is she? Diana said. Base housing, temporary quarters while we process her transfer documentation. A beat. Diana, whatever she has, it's been verified as legitimate. We ran the photograph this morning. The second woman in it matches confirmed identity photos from 13 years ago. Reeves's voice dropped a half register. The operational record that we have on file for her lists her status as killed in action. Classified incident. No surviving documentation. I know her status, Diana said. What you may not know, Reeves said carefully, is that the classification on that incident was reviewed 8 months ago, internally, and the review produced a finding that we were not authorized to share through standard channels. Diana waited. The finding, Reeves said, was that the incident may not have been what the original classification described. The fluorescent light above the equipment room buzzed once, indifferent and institutional, and said nothing useful. Diana stood with the phone against her ear and felt something move through her chest that she could not name cleanly. Not hope exactly, because hope was a thing she had worked very hard to set down in a specific room 13 years ago and leave behind. Not certainty, something between the two. Something that felt like the ground shifting beneath a building she had thought was on solid foundation, and discovering that the foundation itself had been misread. I'll be there at noon, she said. I'll arrange access, Reeves said. Diana handed the phone back to the administrator, who received it with the careful neutrality of someone who understood they had been in proximity to something significant and had chosen wisely not to ask about it. She went back to her calibration check. Her hands were steady. They had been steady all morning, but the steadiness now had a different quality to it. Not the steadiness of a woman holding herself still, but the steadiness of a woman who has just been told that the map she has been navigating by for 13 years may have had an error in it, and who is now moving toward the place where the error was marked. Because that is what you do when you have spent 13 years being the kind of person who moves toward the thing that needs to be understood rather than away from it. Webb found her at 11:40 in the equipment alcove. He looked at her face. He didn't ask what had happened. He had the particular intelligence of a man who understood that some information was delivered by expression, and that asking for a verbal version of what was already visible was a waste of both people's time. You need to go somewhere, he said. At noon, she said. I'll cover your afternoon inventory, he said. I know where everything goes. She looked at him. You've been paying attention to my supply rotation. I pay attention to things, he said. That is becoming increasingly apparent, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. The particular controlled, not quite smile of a man who had decided that this was a moment for steadiness rather than levity, and was honoring that decision with everything except the corner of his mouth. Whatever it is, he said, you don't have to do it alone. Diana looked at him for a moment. 3 seconds. The length of time it took her to assess a face and decide what she found there. What she found in his was the same thing she had found every time she had looked at it since 8:17 yesterday morning. No agenda, no performance, no angle being worked. Just a man who had decided she was worth being honest with and was maintaining that decision without requiring anything back. I know, she said. She picked up her clipboard. She finished the last 3 items on her calibration check. She placed the clipboard on the cart in the exact position it needed to be for the afternoon team to find it without confusion. Then she took off her equipment lanyard and set it on the cart beside the clipboard. She was going to base housing. She was going to sit across from a woman who had carried a photograph for reasons Diana did not yet fully understand, in a pocket next to a message meant for a person who had spent 13 years believing one thing about the world she had come from, and was now 40 minutes away from discovering that the things she had believed might not have been exactly true. The work is not finished. That was what the liaison officer had said, and Diana had understood it when she heard it as a statement about mission, about purpose, about the thing that doesn't stop being itself just because you stop looking at it. But standing in the equipment alcove with her lanyard on the cart and the corridor ahead of her and noon approaching, she began to consider another possibility, that the sentence had not been about the mission at all, that it had been about a person, that somewhere in the classified architecture of 13 years of careful operational distance, something had been kept alive that Diana had long since accepted was gone. She walked out of the alcove. She moved through the corridor past Base 6, past the charge desk, past Linda, who looked up and opened her mouth and read Diana's expression, and closed it again with the grace of someone who had learned today when to speak and when to simply watch. Through the ambulance bay doors, into the noon light. She did not look back at the building. She already knew what it looked like. She had been looking at it for 19 days. What she did not know, what she was walking toward with her hands steady and her jaw set, and something in her chest that refused to be named until it had a reason to be named, was what came next. That was the question. That had always been the question. Base housing at noon was quiet in the way that military installations go quiet in the middle of a workday. Not empty, just purposeful. Everyone somewhere they were supposed to be. The grounds holding their breath between the morning's activity and the afternoons. Diana walked the path from the visitor checkpoint to Building 7 without checking the number twice. She had memorized it from the access information Reeve sent through the liaison line. Old habit, you don't look at the map twice when you're walking somewhere that matters. The room was small, standard temporary quarters, a chair, a table, a window that faced the interior courtyard. The liaison officer was already seated when Diana walked in. She had changed clothes. Someone had found her something clean, something that fit well enough. She sat with her back straight and her hands on the table and her eyes on the door. And when Diana came through it, something in her posture released. Not dramatically, not with any visible motion, but Diana felt it the way you feel pressure equalize in a confined space. A man from the base interpreter pool sat in the corner. Young, professionally neutral, there to bridge the gap between Diana's fluency and the conversation's formality. Diana looked at him once, assessed him, and then did not look at him again for the first several minutes because she did not need him, and they both knew it. She sat down across from the liaison officer. They looked at each other. "You came," the woman said, in her own language, direct, no ceremony. "You waited," Diana said back, same language, same directness. Something moved in the liaison officer's expression. Not quite a smile, not quite relief. The specific expression of a person who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has just found the right hands to transfer it to. "My name is Farah," she said. "My mother's name was Soraya." Diana held the name carefully, like the photograph, like something that had been folded too many times along the same lines and needed to be held flat before it could be read clearly. "Soraya," she repeated. "She spoke of you," Farah said. "Not often, not with details, but enough. She called you the one who listens before she speaks. She said it was the rarest thing she had encountered in 13 years of working with Americans." Diana said nothing. She let the words exist in the room without rushing them toward a conclusion. "She gave me the photograph before the incident," Farah said. "She told me to keep it. She told me that if the work ever brought me to a place where I heard a voice that spoke the way the woman in the photograph spoke, not just the language, the way, I was to give it to her. And I was to deliver the message." She paused. "I did not expect to be sitting in an American military hospital when it happened. I did not expect it to happen the way it happened. No, Diana said. Neither did I. Farah looked at her hands on the table, then back up. The message was not the entire message, she said. Diana felt the shift, that particular atmospheric change, the one that comes just before something lands that cannot be unlanded. There is a second part, Farah said. My mother told me the first part was the door. The second part was what was behind it. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket again. This time she produced not paper, but a small drive. Standard, unremarkable to anyone who didn't understand what it represented to the woman who had carried it from a region most people in this building could not locate without a map. Through an operation that had gone wrong, through 2 hours and 40 minutes in a room with armed men, through an extraction and a processing procedure and a night in base housing. She placed it on the table between them. Diana looked at it. She did not touch it yet. She recorded it herself, Farah said, 8 months ago. She said if the classification review produced what she believed it would produce, there were things that needed to be said directly, in her voice, to the right person. A pause. She said the right person would know what to do with it. Diana picked up the drive. It weighed nothing. It weighed everything. Where is she? Diana said. The question she had been not asking since the moment she recognized the face in the photograph. The question she had carried from the supply alcove, to the corridor, to the ambulance bay doors, to this chair, in this room. She asked it now with the flatness of someone who has trained themselves to ask the important questions without putting their entire internal architecture into the asking. Because if you put everything into the question and the answer is the wrong one, you have nothing left to stand on. Farah looked at her for a long moment. I don't know, she said. And then before Diana could process that, she added, but 8 months ago when she made that recording, she was alive. The room was absolutely still. The interpreter in the corner had stopped his quiet notations. Diana sat with the drive in her hand and the word alive in the air between them, and did not move for 3 full seconds, which was 2.5 seconds longer than she allowed herself to not move in situations that required her to be functional. She exhaled. Once. Controlled. The way she had been exhaling controlled breaths since she was 26 years old, and someone had taught her that your breath was the one thing you could always regulate when everything else was outside your control. The classified review, she said. Reeves told me this morning it produced a finding. Yes, Farah said. My mother anticipated it. She had been working for 8 months to ensure that the finding reached the right people. She called it the last operation. A pause. She said it was harder than any of the others because the enemy was paperwork. Diana almost laughed. It was not a laugh that reached the surface, but it was there. The recognition of a person she had known intimately through 6 years of shared work in places that would never be acknowledged. The specific way that person approached impossibility, with patience and with dark humor, and with the absolute certainty that the work mattered even when the machinery around the work was actively trying to bury it. She's still in the field, Diana said. It was not a question. She never left it, Farah said simply. The incident was real. The classification was not. She made a choice. The choice required her to disappear from the official record. She disappears well. A small pause. You know this about her. I taught her half of it, Diana said. Farah looked at her. Something in her expression shifted. Not surprise, but the particular recognition of a person who is meeting a piece of her mother's history in 3 dimensions for the first time, and finding that the dimensions match what she was told to expect. She said you would say something like that, Farah said. Diana closed her hand around the drive. She sat for a moment with what she now knew and let it reorganize the architecture of the last 13 years. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the specific way that true information reorganizes false frameworks, quietly and structurally and without asking permission. 13 years of a grief that had been real. 13 years of a loss that had been real. The loss was real. The death had not been. The distinction did not make the 13 years smaller. It made what came next possible. "What does she need?" Diana said. Farah looked at her steadily. "The drive will tell you more than I can," she said. "But what I can tell you is that the operation she is working is the same operation she was working when the incident happened. It did not stop. It went underground. It has been underground for 13 years." She paused. "And there is a piece of it that she cannot complete from her position. A piece that requires someone who can be in two worlds at once. Someone who speaks what she speaks and moves where she moves and understands both the language of the field and the language of the institution." The interpreter in the corner set down his pen. He was not translating anymore. He was simply witnessing. And the fact that he had stopped trying to perform his function and had simply gone still told Diana that whatever was happening in this room had moved past the category of things that required official documentation. "She chose you," Farah said. "She chose this facility. She chose the timing. The contractors being taken, that was not coincidence. That was a thread she pulled to create a situation that would require a specific capability at a specific location." Her eyes were level, direct. The eyes of a woman who had carried this information for a long time and was now delivering it with the precision her mother had taught her. "You were not found yesterday. You were guided here. The work brought you here because she needed you here." Diana looked at the drive in her hand. 13 years of invisible, 19 days at Womack, 43 minutes of necessary, and underneath all of it, running quiet and continuous like a current beneath still water. A woman who had taught Diana everything she knew about how to move through the world without being seen, using every single lesson to make sure Diana ended up in exactly this room at exactly this moment. She should have been angry. Part of her was. The part that had spent 13 years folding the loss of a person she trusted into something manageable and living on top of it like it was solid ground. That part had something to say about being moved across a board without being consulted. But another part, the deeper part, the part that had been speaking languages in trauma bays all morning and walking to gurneys it had no assignment to walk to, and setting pins on inventory logs and not picking them back up. That part recognized the architecture of this moment and understood that the anger and the recognition were not mutually exclusive. That you could be furious at someone and understand them completely at the same time. That this, in fact, was what it felt like to know a person. She stood up. "Thank you," she said to Farah, in the language they had been speaking, with the specific regional inflection that had started all of this, that had carried geography inside it this morning and had found its frequency and had not let go. Farah stood. She extended her hand, not the gesture of a formal handshake, but the particular gesture of one operator acknowledging another, palm up, slight inclination of the head. The gesture that said, "I was trusted to bring this to you. I have brought it. Now it is yours." Diana took her hand, held it for a moment, then she walked out. Webb was in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and the particular quality of stillness that she had been cataloging since 8:17 yesterday morning. He had a coffee. He had not brought one for her this time, which told her he had understood, correctly, that this was not a coffee moment. He looked at her face. He looked at her hand. He saw the drive. He said nothing. She kept walking. He fell into step beside her. They were halfway across the base grounds, moving back toward the medical center in the afternoon light, before either of them spoke. "Thursday," Diana said, "the meeting with Calloway." 1400, Webb said. "I'll be there." He nodded, kept walking. "There are conditions," she said. "She'll listen to conditions. I stay attached to this facility as primary cover, full medical function. I'm not a consultant who shows up for language emergencies. I work the department. I cover my shifts. I do the job." "Understood. The cover stays clean. Harmon gets a limited briefing. Enough to stop pulling personnel files, not enough to change how he runs his department. Reasonable. And Linda gets a raise, Diana said. Webb looked at her. She has been covering for things she doesn't understand since my second day here, Diana said. She deserves a raise. He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then something moved at the corner of his mouth. I'll see what I can do about Linda. Not see what you can do, Diana said. Do. All right, he said. Done. They walked the rest of the way in the kind of silence that exists between people who have been through enough together in a short enough time that the silence has texture. Not empty, not uncomfortable, but inhabited by everything that has happened and everything that is still coming, and the mutual understanding that both of those things are real, and neither of them needs to be performed. At 2:40, Diana was back in Bay 6. Lead aprons, portable unit calibration, contrast supply inventory, the small, ordered world that had been waiting for her exactly where she left it. She moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 19 days and had learned every rhythm of it, every gap, every place where the system was slightly imperfect, and the imperfection had to be compensated for with knowledge rather than tools. At 3:15, she heard the ambulance bay doors. Single gurney, 2 paramedics, a woman, civilian, mid-40s, the specific kind of controlled panic that belongs to a person who has been managing something alone for too long and has finally allowed themselves to stop managing it. She was frightened in the honest way, not performed, not suppressed, just present, sitting in the middle of her fear like it was a room she had walked into and couldn't find the door out of. The attending moved to her, started the intake process, the standard rhythm. Diana was at the suture station 15 feet away. She watched the woman's hands, clasped, tight, the white-knuckle grip of someone who needs to hold on to something because the alternative is falling. She walked over. The attending looked up. Diana did not look at the attending. She looked at the woman. "My name is Diana," she said. "I'm not going to be treating you. That's Dr. Keene, and he's very good. But I'm going to stand here while he works. Is that all right?" The woman looked at her. The tight hands loosened slightly, just enough. "Yes," she said. Yes, thank you." Diana stood where she said she would stand. She was not translating. She was not correcting a diagnosis. She was not speaking a language that no one else in the room could speak. She was simply there, present and steady and refusing to be invisible in the specific way that was needed in this specific moment for this specific person. The attending worked. The woman's hands slowly loosened the rest of the way. Webb was in the corridor again when Diana came back to the supply station at 3:44. He was holding a small evidence bag. Inside it, visible through the clear plastic, was a pin. He held it out to her. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it out of the bag and held it in her palm, the same way he had held it the night before. She looked at the specific design, the specific weight of it, the 13 years of complicated feeling that had lived inside an object small enough to hide in a closed fist. She did not put it back in her pocket. She clipped it to the inside of her lanyard, behind her facility ID, where it would not be visible to anyone who was not specifically looking for it, where it would be present without being announced, where it would exist the way she had learned to exist, in the space between visible and invisible, in the particular territory of a person who had chosen to be both at once, rather than only one or the other. She put her lanyard back on. Webb watched. He said nothing. He didn't need to. At 5:58, Diana clocked out. She folded her scrubs. She gathered her things. She walked to the front desk and told Linda, in a voice that was matter-of-fact and left no room for argument, that the morning charge nurse position that had been posted for 6 weeks without a qualified applicant had a qualified applicant, and the qualified applicant was Linda, and that Diana had submitted the recommendation through the proper channel at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Linda stared at her. "You can't just..." The recommendation is already filed, Diana said. The rest is up to you. Linda opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her desk, looked up. Are you coming back tomorrow? She said. And the question carried more than it said. It carried 19 days of watching, and the previous day's extraordinary events, and the specific anxiety of someone who has come to rely on a presence they were told was temporary. 6:53, Diana said. Linda exhaled. Diana walked to the exit. She pushed through the ambulance bay doors into the early evening. The air was cooler than this morning, the sky in the particular stage of blue that comes right before it decides to become something else. She stood for a moment on the concrete outside the bay and breathed the outdoor air and let her eyes adjust to the change. The drive was in her jacket pocket. The pin was behind her facility ID. Thursday was 2 days away. Calloway's offer was real, and Diana's conditions were reasonable, and the meeting would happen, and something would be decided that she had already, in the part of herself that made decisions before she was ready to acknowledge them, already made. She thought about Soraya, about a woman who had taught her to fold herself into the background, and then spent 13 years using every lesson to fold her carefully back out again. About the kind of patience that required, about the kind of faith, about the fact that the work was not finished. She had understood it last night as mission. She understood it now as something larger than mission, as the ongoing fact of being alive and capable and present in a world that kept generating moments that required exactly what she had and kept generating people who needed exactly what she could give. That this was not a burden, that it had never been a burden, even when she had told herself it was. That the difference between a weight you carry because you must and a weight you carry because it is yours was the difference between resignation and purpose. She was not resigned. She had never been resigned. She had been waiting. Webb's vehicle was in the lot. He was leaning against it with the casual patience of a man who had decided to be somewhere and had no particular urgency about when the somewhere became active. He looked at her when she came through the doors. He tilted his head slightly toward the passenger side. She walked to the vehicle. She got in. They drove out of the lot and into the evening, and behind them, Womack Army Medical Center held its fluorescent light against the darkening sky. The same building it had always been, beige walls and indifferent corridors, and a supply cart outside Base 6, and a charge desk where Linda was filing a recommendation letter she had not expected, and a Base 7 patient whose oxygen levels were exactly where they needed to be. Nothing about the building had changed. Everything about the woman who had worked inside it for 19 days had been confirmed. And somewhere in a region that did not appear on most maps, in an operation that had no official record, a woman named Soraya was waiting for a signal that was now, finally, 19 days and one extraordinary afternoon in the making, on its way. Diana Cole had not been hiding. She had been becoming exactly what this moment required. And now the moment was here, and she was ready. And the work, the real work, the work that did not end when the shift changed, or the file was filed, or the cover was maintained, or the years accumulated. The work was waiting. It had always been waiting. It had simply needed her to stop pretending she had left it behind and start walking toward it with both hands open and her lanyard straight and a pin clipped behind her ID that said, without words, without announcement, without any performance at all, I was never gone. I was here the whole time, and I am not finished.